Hello everyone, and welcome back to Knights of the Pageless Library. This is an audiobook discussion podcast. I am Ryan Knight, and I will be your host for this episode. And on today's episode, I'm going to be taking a look at The Tatooist of Auschwitz, written by Heathe Morris and narrated by Richard Armitage. But before we go any further talking about something as horrific as the Holocaust, I just want to say thank you to anyone who's ever listened to me for any amount of time ramble about any and all subjects. I just want to say thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I greatly appreciate it. And if you're new here, I greatly appreciate you as well. I know your time is the most valuable thing in this life that we have, and I couldn't say thank you enough for giving that to me. So again, thank you. And let's move on to the review. The Tatooist of Auschwitz was written in 2018. As well as the audiobook I will be listening to was also published in 2018 by Belinda Publishing. Now, from everything I can see, this is pretty much what Heathe Morris is known for. The main novel, The Tatooist of Auschwitz, is the written account that Heathe Morris got from Holocaust survivor Ludwig Sokolov, or Lale. When Heather first met Lale back in 2003, she decided to gather his story that he might have to tell. And over the course of the next 3 years, she gathered notes and information and stories from him in order to tell his tale. Lale died in 2006, unfortunately, but because of Heathe Morris's efforts, Lale and a few others might have their stories live on. This story has also been made into a short TV series, if I'm looking at this correctly, and I'll do my best to link that in the description below. I listened to this title through Audible, and I believe I picked it up as a buy one, get one free title. There was a few titles a few months back that were listed that you could purchase one and you received another title for free from a chosen list. And I believe that's where I got this title. I cannot be 100% certain. It's been a little while that it's been sitting in my library. Either way, this one comes out to 7 hours and 25 minutes, which is actually a pretty short listen. I mostly listened to this one while I was mowing my field, so I finished it relatively quickly, so I thought I should get a episode out about it, because I know I am doing horrible at actually getting episodes out on time. I thought Richard Armitage's performance in this one was good. I'm not going to say his performance was great. I don't think it honestly elevated this story, which, I mean, considering the subject matter, I don't know if there is much elevating this story. His performance was good for what you are actually listening to. I'll just put it that way, without getting too spoiler heavy. I don't think there's too terribly much I can spoil for you, considering the title of the book. But Richard Armitage's performance is good. Again, I don't think he takes anything away from this book, but I don't necessarily think he adds anything to this. I have listened to one other title of his. I remember we listened to a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde retelling that he had also done, and I'm pretty sure I felt the same during that one as well, that I just think he's okay. He's not great. He's not amazing. However, I commend him for reading this one because honestly, it was probably a little bit hard to get through at times. So my hat is off to him for this particular performance. Okay, so now for the big questions. Is this one easy to follow? Yes, considering it is basically a documentary of this man's life during his time at Auschwitz-Birkenau. But is this one easy to listen to? No, for very obvious reasons. This is an incredible story. However, this one's going to probably cut pretty deep. I'm probably not going to do an entire spoiler on this one because I don't think that there's much I could say that would add to it by giving my full opinions on it. But what I am going to say is that anyone and everyone could benefit from listening to this story. While there are a lot of atrocities that are spoken of in this book, there's also a very, very passionate story behind this. This book is actually first and foremost a love story. However, Lale's story couldn't have been told if it were not for the bravery of both himself and a lot of people around him. There are plenty of times that Lale probably shouldn't have lived to tell his story, if not for those people who helped him get through this plight. A lot of them didn't make it to the other side in order to tell their story. So to be able to be given a story like this, which is such a kind of deep, dark story, but to see that there is light on the other side, should be inspiring to anyone who could possibly pick up this book. And not to make it sound too terribly horrible, but honestly, if you're having a bad day, you could pick up this book and listen to it, and always remember that it could probably be worse. And I don't really want to say that in a bad way. I want to say it in more of an inspirational way. I know we all go through shit. I know everybody's shit is different. However, sometimes it's really good to put it into perspective that sometimes the stuff you're feeling and that you think is really horrible could probably always be worse, unfortunately. Now, that's obviously a really dark and probably horrible way of saying I highly recommend this book. And I would highly recommend this book to anyone and everyone. Everyone could benefit from listening to this story, because I think it can also show you that no matter how dark things seem to be, they can also always get better. So with that, you definitely have my recommendation to go pick this one up. I'm going to go ahead and pass the spoiler wall here just a little bit now. This one won't be too terribly long because I don't really want to necessarily relive this book, and I don't really want to ruin it for anyone. However, unfortunately, some of it's already spoiled for you. When you listen to the actual book, you are not told that this is Lale's story directly from his mouth. That is not told to you until the very end. I honestly thought this one was a work of fiction when I first listened to it, until you get to the very end and realize that this is the story that he is relaying to Heather. So unfortunately, I had to spoil a little bit for you, that you know Lale lives at least long enough to tell his story. So just keep that one in mind. But if you're new here and you don't want anything spoiled for you, please pause the podcast now and go listen to this story. And then please come back here and let me know what you think about it. This story opens up with our main character Lale, who is forcefully taken from his home of Krompaki in Slovakia. Lale is 25 at the time, and I believe the year is 1942. And if I'm remembering correctly, he is taken because they being the Nazis, show up and demand that the Jewish families surrender at least one of their children. Lale actually volunteers himself and is forcefully taken in cattle cars to Auschwitz-Birkenau. One of the first things he witnesses is several men being killed for absolutely no reason. Now, from what I gather of this story, it doesn't sound like Lale was necessarily like a fully devout Jewish man. However, that part clearly did not matter to the Nazis at the time. Lale kind of quickly realizes that he needs to clearly do anything and everything he can to survive. One of the first things that actually happens to him is that he falls ill, to the point where he probably should have been taken away and would have probably died while he was unconscious. If it weren't for a couple of his friends, especially one who actually took him off of the body cart when it came through one day and picked him up, his friend rehabilitated him back to life, and I believe it cost him his friend's life when they found out what he did. Lale is quickly taken under the wing of the current Tatuviera, or the Tatooist at Auschwitz. He is made to be his assistant, and at this point, his job is exactly what you would expect. He is expected to tattoo the numbers onto newly arriving prisoners. Lale feels incredibly guilty when he starts doing this job because essentially he is helping sign everybody's death warrant as they walk through the doors. And in doing so, he does realize he is technically protecting his own life. The Tatuviera is actually a highly sought after position, is what it sounds like. Simply because you are afforded extra rations and your own housing, as well as you technically are safe at the time. You're never safe fully, but if there's a job you want to have, this might be one of the least bad jobs to have. However, Lale has to look all of his fellow prisoners in the face before he simply makes them a number in the Nazis' eyes. One of the prisoners that Lale tattoos, her face gets kind of stuck in his mind, and he actually remembers her number as well. Lale continues to do everything that he must in order to survive until one day, Pepin, the main Tatuviera, does not show back up for work, and Lale is made the Tatuviera. However, he does not know what Pepin's fate is at this time. Now being the main Tatuviera, Lale has even more freedoms throughout the camp. Lale uses his position to actually better his life as well as a few others. he talks to outside contractors because when he is brought to Auschwitz, I believe most of it is actually being built at the time. It seems to be in one of the earlier groups that arrived there. Unfortunately, these men that he talks to are building both housing as well as crematoriums for the prisoners. These men, though, are willing to try to help Lale as much as they possibly can without getting in trouble. So they begin to bring Lale food. Lale says he's going to come up with some way to pay them, and the way he does that is by talking to some of the female workers who come to the camp as well. Some of their jobs are to bring any belongings that the prisoners come in with and sort them out and turn them over to the SS officers. Lale uses this food he acquires to trade for provisions that were taken from prisoners arriving at the camps. This is what actually gets him acquainted with Gita, the woman that he had tattooed earlier, whose face as well as her tattoo number stuck out in his mind. Lale then determines that he's going to do whatever he can to keep himself and Gita safe and make sure that they can escape this place alive. Lale's Nazi handler, I'm going to call him, which is basically a guard that follows Lale around and tells him where he needs to be, Beretsky, is actually surprisingly, kind is not the correct word, but he is surprisingly not as Nazi-ish as you would think he would be towards Lale. However, he really does show his true colors against many other prisoners in Lale's presence. However, because of Lale's position as the Tatuviera, he has some form of protection from the Nazis. Beretsky is surprisingly the one who allows Lale to write a note to Gita that Beretsky makes sure is delivered. He then returns a note from her to Lale, which is what starts their relationship. Much of the story is Lale using the food that he's getting from outside sources to trade on the inside for more goods, which he then trades for more food and other things like medicine on the outside to have them brought in to help people on the inside. Lale ends up securing Gita a job at the administration office, which is actually seen to be a highly sought after job as well because it is widely considered relatively safe. We get a few side stories of some of Gita's friends and the atrocities that happen to them as well. We get a few other snippets as well of prisoners whom Lale treats well when he first encounters them, which actually ends up saving his life later on in his story. Lale and Gita end up spending nearly 3 years at Auschwitz-Birkenau before the place is attacked by the Russians. The prisoners are rounded up to be moved, and while they are being moved, Lale ends up in a different camp. And once he arrives at this other camp, he simply walks out of the camp and leaves because he's had absolutely enough and he's not going to go through it again. Gita actually ends up escaping along with several other women when the women are split off to be taken to a different camp. Lale is actually picked up by the Russians and is actually forcefully held by the Russians because of his ability to speak so many different languages. However, while he's doing this, one of his tasks is to simply go into German towns and pick up women to come party with the Russians at night. Lale usually does all of this under close watch. However, he proves himself to be very trustworthy, and so one night when his guard is going to be transferred somewhere else, they decide to let Lale go into town on his own in order to secure the entertainment for the night. Lale simply takes everything that they sent him with and just leaves. Gita ends up surviving and joining the Red Cross. Lale ends up reconnecting with her once they both make it back to Slovakia. They end up going on together, I believe, to have at least one child, and Lale still goes through some unfortunate things even after all he has already been through, simply being persecuted for his religious beliefs, unfortunately. Now, it is worth noting that this book actually fits into the Holocaust fiction genre of book, simply because a lot of the story is told from the third-person point of view with Lale as the narrator. It could also be said that some of the things probably have been embellished in order to make for a better story, but nonetheless, I'm not going to take anything away from this story. Even if some of it might be a little bit exaggerated, I don't think anybody can paint a more clear picture of what happened there than someone who actually lived through it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the review here. I don't think I did the story any justice. I mostly wanted to hit on some of the high points. I think there's a lot you could gain if you listen to this one for yourself. It's a pretty short listen, and it's well worth your time. And if you stuck with me this long, again, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your time, and I really hope to catch you in the next one.